A new study was just published today focusing on communicating with pet dogs via those little button boards, and it's actually really interesting, so let's talk about it. This is the study right here. Soundboard trained dogs produce non-accidental, non-random, and non-imitative two-button combination. The researchers did a statistical analysis on almost 200,000 different soundboard interactions, and the findings suggested that they weren't random and they weren't just imitating the owners. The dogs were actually combining different words to communicate with their owner. It's interesting because the results show that the needs, that's the thing they're communicating most. Going outside, getting food, and then you can see the dark blue stuff up here like poop. That was talked about less. The researchers wanted to look to see whether we could improve our ability to understand our dogs and communicate with our dogs using these soundboards.
Bottom line, I just don't buy it. If you look at the study, what they're talking about, if you could see videos of this online, people get the soundboard, then their dogs press on the different sounds to communicate to the owner what it wants. Does it want to go outside? Does it need to take a poop? Does it want its toy? Does it want to eat food? Does it just want to say, I love you to the owner? Whatever. And I've watched many, many of these videos. I'm not convinced by a single one of them that dog is actually doing any kind of real communication or understands what they're doing. Some are at the really blatant end of the spectrum where the dog is just does appear to be randomly just hitting whatever's in front of them. And the owner's doing all the cognitive work here. The owner is making sense of whatever the dog is doing. Right, and of course, there's only 20 buttons there. They're all doggy related. It'd be almost impossible for the dog not to hit, one of those buttons that doesn't relate to things that dogs want or do. You know what I mean? Like there's no literature button or whatever. There's no button there that is a non sequitur that doesn't make sense for the dog. It's all toy, food, outside, love. It's all things that are related to your relationship with the dog. What this study is doing is just looking at a ton of these interactions and saying, is it random? Or is it just imitative? And they say at a population level, it doesn't appear to be either random or imitative. So, all right, I buy that dogs are just not imitating what their owners are doing. But I also buy that it's not entirely random, because random would mean that there's an equal probability of hitting any button. I think probably the buttons are not randomly distributed, and meaning that it's probably more likely for the dog to hit some buttons than the other ones. Also, I'm also willing to acknowledge that dogs are smart animals. They're very attuned to their human owners. They sort of evolved, a huge neuronal density in order to be able to be socially very aware of their owners, and they understand a lot of words that people say, and this has all been pretty well established. And they also the whole Pavlovian response, right, was done in dogs. They can learn to associate certain behaviors with certain actions. So I'm willing to believe that some dogs may know that if they hit certain buttons, that good things happen. They get taken outside, or they get a treat or whatever. For that reason, I buy that at a population level, it's not random. That doesn't mean that at an individual level, any individual dog is like strategically using specific buttons or specific combination of buttons because to produce a specific outcome, meaning that it's using it to communicate in the way that we think of as communication. Now, this is coming, on top of decades and decades of research into animal communication. You could even go back all the way to Clever Hans with this, the horse who the owner believed could do math and could read and could interpret tables, whatever, could do all these things. And it turns out he was just subconsciously communicating to the horse. Now, the horse was looking at taking cues from the owner, and the owner would basically cue the horse when to stop. And then the horse was able to get the same cues from the audience, so the owner didn't even have to be there. However, if there was no human being present who knew what the right answer was, the horse's ability ended. It could not do anything. So clearly, his performance was based entirely on just getting cues from the humans that were present. How do we know that that's not happening now? Right? How do we know this isn't more cue-based? That's not the same thing as imitation. It's more cue-based, or it could just be learned pattern of behavior. That's different than understanding how to use language, what words mean, and being able to strategically use them. I would take a lot more convincing that dogs are communicating with these soundboards, especially based on the videos that I've seen, than this population level data looking at 200,000 or whatever interactions. Yeah, it's not entirely statistically random or whatever. That's not enough. That doesn't establish that dogs are communicating. This is mostly owners deceiving themselves, and it's really obvious that that's happening when you look at these videos.